Welcome back to Hands-On with Reinforcement Learning. This section is called Lights, Camera, Action, Building Blocks of Reinforcement Learning. In this section, we're going to take a look at three things. So the first thing we're going to look at is exploring the possible actions of your CartPole robots in OpenAI Gym. As you may recall, actions are sort of like a pipeline or a channel, if you will, for which the agent makes changes to the environment. So the environment always gives a set of possible actions to the agent. And so the first thing we're going to talk about in the first video, this video, is how you can actually explore what possible actions are there with the OpenAI Gym API. In the second video, what we're going to look at is understanding the environment of CartPole in OpenAI Gym. In the last video, what we're going to do in this section is to use some very simple strategies to code up our first solution to CartPole v0. The idea there is we're not going to use something very complicated, no neural networks, we're not going to use any machine learning, but simply by using very traditional search method, we're going to demonstrate what it means to teach your agents a policy so they can navigate the environment. So let's start the first video of this section. Exploring the possible actions of your CartPole robots in OpenAI Gym. In this video, we're going to take a look at demonstrating how to list out actions in the OpenAI Gym API and comparing different actions between environments and then visualizing the actions on screen. So it's a lot more concrete rather than just graphs on screen. Now that we went through how you can generate the render loop for the OpenAI Gym environments, I want to spend a little bit of time really digging into how the OpenAI Gym environment works. So recall that we were having a loop that just very naively sampled different actions from the environment and did any step possible, and that, admittedly is a bit unrefined. So now what we really want to do is to really understand how we can systematically get the environments and the agents to interact together in a way that we can control and predict what's going to happen. So the first thing for us to do is to go to gym.openai.com/docs. And this is a very, very simple documentation on the OpenAI Gym environment. The only thing, we can scroll down to the running an environment section, and actually what we see here is exactly what we've implemented in the last section. And so the next step for us to have a more informed training loop is that, keep in mind here where we had environment.step, actually, instead of sampling randomly from the action space, we can put in different integers to indicate different actions that we take. And then the environment actually gives us 4 numbers back. And the 4 numbers represent 4 different things that the environment wants to tell us. So number 1, the first number is the observation object. And the observation object really just means a vector of numbers that represents the state after the agent has performed an action on it. So in CartPole's environments, what that means is they'll give you 4 numbers that describe where the pole is, where the cart is, and a bit of the rotation of the pole for you to feed in back into the agent to understand what's the best next step. And then the second number that the step function gives us is the reward number. So the reward is the amount of reward that the previous action generated. So while this number is a little bit arbitrary, the goal is always to increase your total reward, right? So in a CartPole environment, you would need to, the rewards represents the number of steps your pole has remained on the car. In a mounted car, the only reward is when you get to the flag. In a very classic example of playing Atari games, the reward is the score shown on screen. The third variable that comes back from the step function is the done boolean. So what this means is whether the environment has ended. So if you think about tasks, or I guess experiences in real life where they terminate at a consistent point in time, and that's a very convoluted way of saying that kind of there's like a self containing unit of a thing. So for example, in blackjack, you can't hit blackjack, or you can lose the dealer after all the cards are on the table. In chess, somebody wins eventually. And we can contrast this to experiences where there isn't a defined and consistent ending, like drawing. If you draw something on paper, there's no defined ending point. There's a subjective point of, we're finished painting, but there's no defined ending points. So whether an experience has an ending point in reinforcement learning literature is called whether the task is episodic. So, whether an episode has a start and an end. So this Boolean here done indicates whether the episode has ended. So here you can see that, it says most, if not all, tasks are divided into well-defined episodes, much like CartPole, right? You either survive 200 steps, which is the CartPole's equivalent of, where we're succeeded in a CartPole task, or the stick falls off the car, and at this stage you have to restart. So the done Boolean has a very defined meaning in CartPole. And then the last variable that comes back from the step function is the info dictionary. So now, this doesn't really feature in this video. It gives you some information sometimes, but really not a big focus. So there you have it. If we step, meaning if the agent applies an action to the environment and the environment tells the agent back what that action has done to the environment, it actually comes back with 4 different variables so that you can use it to tune the action for the next step. And this is all very abstract, so let's put this in action. So here I have on screen the Windows PowerShell again. I have Python open. So let's go ahead and import Gym, and then we can start new CartPole environment. And then, as we said before, but reminding you here, every time you start a new environment, the first thing to ever do is to reset the environment. After you reset, you notice that there is this array of 4 numbers coming out, and this is actually the first observation that we'll ever get. What this means is you've resetted the environment and you have as such obtained the first observation, or kind of how the worlds start, right? So you have 4 different numbers here representing 4 different properties between the cart and the pole. And let's see what step comes back. So the first thing to understand is how we can see what are the permissible actions given the environment. So as you may recall from the last video, the way to do this is to type m.action space, and it will give you this return saying discrete 2. And this is OpenAI Gym's way of saying there are 2 discrete different actions you can take, and generally this means that the first action that you can take would be indexed at 0, and the second action would be indexed at 1. And then so for us to do either action, doesn't really matter which one, we can then say m.step. So in our last video, after m.step, what we did was just sample a random action in the action space. But here we're going to do something more deliberate. So let's say we do action 0, the first action in the action space. You can, and as an exercise, you can try visualizing this, and you'll realize that 0 represents going left with the cart, and 1 represents going right with the cart. So let's see what step 0 gives us. So as we said before, it actually gives us 4 different variables. So number 1 is the array of what the environment looks like after we've moved our cart to the left. And as you can see, this mirrors our first state, the 4 numbers in our first state, And some numbers have moved quite significantly for these two numbers, and some numbers have moved just a bit. The second thing is we received a reward of 1, meaning that we've survived one more episode. And the done boolean is false, meaning that our pole is still on the cart and there's nothing to do but to try another action, right? So you can always continue on, and we can see what happened. And you can see here, actually, the episode terminates on this step here because we have simply blindly moved to the left and the pole has fallen from the cart. And so what this means is that you can also see that the reward is 0, unlike 1, because we didn't survive this episode, and the episode itself has ended. So generally, what you would do is to write a loop that detects whether the episode is done, and then completely restarts, i.e. calls m.reset to sample a different episode. Now that we've got an understanding of how we can use the OpenAI Gym APIs to explore different actions of the agents, or the possible actions of the agents with regards to interacting with the environment, in the next video, what we're going to do is to understand the environment part a bit better, and specifically we're going to use the CartPole environment again to demonstrate how we can explore the variables and the environment parameters of the CartPole environment. See you next time.